Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about classes in JavaScript. So to get started, if you go ahead and go into your project folder, if you go ahead and navigate to 35-classes, if you go into the start subfolder and open up main.js, then in your browser, if you can go ahead and open up index.html, you should see classes on the page. So classes in JavaScript were not originally available in the original version of JavaScript. They were added later in a different version. And classes are a way for us to define our own custom objects, and we can create objects that are of this particular instance. And so a class is basically a type of function where instead of using the function keyword to initiate it, we use the class keyword. And then any properties that we want to assign to our class, they will be added to a new method basically called a constructor. And so to see an example, what we're going to do is we're going to take our user profile object that we created in a previous lesson, and we're going to transform this into a class. And then after we do this, we'll be able to see some of the key differences between this type of object and our own custom object that will be a user profile type. So the first thing you want to do when you want to create a class is we need to use the class keyword. So we'll do class. Then next, we need to name our class. And generally best practice is to start your class name with a capital letter. So we're going to go ahead and do user profile. And then in your class, the next thing you want to do is you want to add a constructor. And so the constructor is basically an internal method that will be called when we create a new instance of our user profile. And the constructor method can take parameters that we can pass when we instantiate our user profile object, and we can use those properties and set them on our custom object. So for example, in our user profile here, we had a property called first name. So I'm going to go ahead and copy first name and pass it as a parameter to our constructor. Then in our constructor, we can go ahead and use the this keyword to refer to the context of this object, so our user profile object. And we're going to go ahead and say this.firstName is equal to first name. And so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and create an instance of our user profile class. So to do this, we need to use the new keyword. So we're going to go ahead and create a new variable called user. So we're going to do const user, and we're going to set it equal to new user profile. And then we need to pass in our name. So we're just going to go ahead and do Joe. So now I'm going to go ahead and log our user object, and we can take a look at it in our console. And so now you'll see we have a user profile object, and this object has a property called first name, and it's set to Joe. So you might be wondering, how is this different than this object here? So let's go ahead and take a look. So if we go ahead and do console.log user profile, go ahead and save and refresh, and we'll see right away that this object is a user profile object, so that's why it starts with this, and then it goes into our object details. This one, on the other hand, is just a regular JavaScript object, and so that's why there's no preceding text, and we can still see the properties on our object. To see another difference, what we'll do is we're going to do console.log, and we're going to go ahead and use type of, and we're going to do user. We'll copy this line here, and we'll paste it here, and we'll replace this with user profile. So if we go ahead and save and refresh, we can see what gets logged. And so we'll see for both of these variables, they're both of type object. So they look pretty similar in this context. So one last thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and try using instance of. So let's go ahead and copy these two lines of code. Let's go ahead and paste it. Let's get rid of type of. Let's go ahead and use instance of. And then we'll do object. Let's go ahead and copy that. Paste that here. And then let's go ahead and do user profile. So now if we go ahead and save and refresh, so you'll see right away when we check these two variables, we can see that both of them are instances of the object data type. However, where it's really different is when we check to see if they are an instance of the user profile class. And we'll see that our user is but our user profile is not. So this is just an example of how these two objects differ when we create our own custom object and when we create a class to create that object. So for our class, we can pass as many parameters as we like. So I'm going to go ahead and pass last name as well. And I'll go ahead and do this.lastName equals last name. And then in addition to having properties, we can also have our own custom methods on our class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take full name. And then because this is a method, we're going to treat it like a function. So we're going to add our parentheses that can take parameters. And then we're going to go ahead and add our curly braces to have our lines of code that'll be executed. So then I'm going to go ahead and copy this line here and place it down here. So now down here, we can go ahead and do console log. And we can go ahead and do our user.fullname. And then we can go ahead and save and refresh. And you'll see our name gets logged. And it's Joe undefined. And that makes sense because we didn't pass a last name. So we'll go ahead and add a last name. So we'll go ahead and do Joe Smith. If you save and refresh, you'll see now we have Joe Smith.